Hey, welcome to the conversation. I'm Andy Mason, and you're listening to the Heaven and Business podcast from the road. So, I am literally right now sitting on the what would you say, window seat at my parents' house in Taupo, New Zealand. And if you can see me just out the window out here, you can see across Lake Taupo, you can see Mount Ruapehu. There's just wonderful. I'm surrounded by Tuis and beautiful birds. It is stunningly beautiful here. I'm loving it. And this is literally week 2 on the road where if you're not sure, jump back to a couple of previous episodes. You'll hear me talk about the working sabbatical, this journey of experimenting while traveling, having paused a bunch of our regular activities to focus on friends, family, refreshing. We've got a couple of events in different locations, meeting people all over the world, and leaning into what is God wanting to say and do in this next season. So this week, I'm going to give you an update of what we've been doing, what I'm observing, and then what I'm learning. And there's some fun for you, some interesting things, but there's a real practical take home that is God speaking to me out of the book Exodus. And I'm just going to unpack that for you also. So firstly, what have we been doing? Well, we landed last week. Much of the week was travel from Nashville, Tennessee to LA, and then from LA all the way to Auckland, New Zealand. It's like a 13-hour flight. And then from Auckland down to Napier, which is about an hour. It struck me as we come back into the country. It's like, number one, this country is smaller than I remember. When you can see both coasts, the ocean on either side of the island as you're flying down, you're like, wow, this is not a big country. 4 million people, I think 35 million sheep, 15 million cattle. Fantastic place. Number one, it's smaller than what I remember. Two, the people are bigger. I don't know if that's happening everywhere, but be careful what you eat, people, because it's affecting every aspect about you. That's not the subject of this, but interesting observation. What else have we been doing? Spending a lot of time with family. So one side of my family now in a retirement home in Havelock North, and the other side of the family in Taupo. So we got to spend much of last weekend in Havelock North. That's in the Hawke's Bay. And I got to spend a ton of time with family and extended family, and then had to make decisions. Who do I meet with? Who do I meet with? Do I go to the church we used to be part of? Do I not go? And I'm going to come to observations and learning from that. And then I got to go up around Tomato Peak. So that's hills surrounding the area, 500 feet above sea level. Actually, you get to the top of it and you'll find rocks and seashells. So at some point that was underwater. But this is a beautiful, lots of native bush that's regrowing, farmland, hills, hard work. So I've got to do that twice. Get up to the top, get around. It's about a 5 kilometer or about a 3 mile hike / jog / run. A friend of mine says, Andy, the wicked run when no one pursues. I said, maybe, but that doesn't apply to me. So I love to run, get outside. So we're doing that, and just lots of time refreshing, being still, conversations, and on and on and on, those conversations, which are good. What am I observing? And well, it's really interesting coming back into a country that you've been away from for a couple of years, that you grew up in. You get to see from a different perspective. And I remember a business meeting that we would have had here maybe 20 years ago. I grew up in the area. My background is agriculture and business consulting. And I remember being in a meeting. I was traveling overseas, very small. So like once a year into Uganda and Africa. But that was my limitation really of any perspective outside of New Zealand. It doesn't matter where you grow up with, it shapes how you see the world. And New Zealand is a very socially run, I would say almost socialist country. It's a beautiful country. They've got a wonderful health system, wonderful education, and it's very socially driven. What does that mean? High taxes, high quality of life, and interesting policies and procedures. Well, I remember someone traveling, coming back and speaking to us and saying, comparing in the States, Even good people can end up under a bridge because of the crazy health costs. What were they really saying? Is there is a drive that Americans have to go for it, because if you don't, there's really no backstop. You have to go for it. Contrast that to New Zealand. The worst that can happen is that you'll be on government support. And that may sound wonderful. Well, the problem with that is it's a disincentive to really go for it and take the risk and advance, because it's comfortable and it's safe. One of the observations of coming back into the country is the roading. Under the previous administration here, they lowered the speed limit to 80 kilometers an hour. So you Americans, just work that out. It's slow. They have added all of these road markers, road lines, and these, I don't know what you'd call them, safety. It's like in between lanes, even guiding you off and on an intersection or a freeway. There's all of these little poles. They look like they're plastic. But I'm like, man, who needs self-driving cars? Who needs to even drive? It's pretty hard to go wrong. And yet people still have accidents. It doesn't matter how much safety you put in place. People are still people. What's the point? The point is, when you have the goal of safety, you remove people's responsibility for themselves, and you actually take away incentive and creativity. It works against it. I'm not saying don't have safety. I'm saying if you have that as the goal, you will kill creativity. You put everyone in a box, and actually you shut down so much that could happen. Just an observation. No offense, but it's fascinating to learn and watch and see. So road rules and markers, our goal is safety. Number 2, the beauty of this country. It is stunningly beautiful. The outdoors here, we've had wonderful weather, but how easy it is. In the States, you pretty much got to pay anywhere you go to do anything. Over here, so many of the tracks, the parks, the national parks, you can walk around for free. Parking, it's free. There's water for free. There's bathrooms for free. It's wonderful. So, perhaps that's the higher taxes that pay for it. But getting out about and really appreciating the nature that is all around us, the birds, the slow down. God made the world and said that it was good. Are you taking advantage of that and appreciating it? And the third one is, observation is, we were staying with my wife's parents in a retirement home. So that is a wonderful place where there are houses and apartments it's not really gated. Anybody can come in and out, but there's tons of services that if you need extra care, then there's a lot there. So that's observation. What was I learning from this? Don't move into a retirement village. That's a personal opinion. Why? Because you're surrounded by people that are dying. What's the problem with that? Well, when you're surrounded by end of life conversations all the time, it robs you of vision and hope and expectation of the future. What's the practical thing you can learn? Surround yourself with every generation. There's always people older than you. There's always people younger than you. But if you only surround yourself with people the same age or older, then your life will get smaller and smaller and smaller. It's so important, so valuable to surround yourself with people younger than you and ask them questions. What are you doing with your life? Where are you going? What's important to you? The more you do that, the more you surround yourself with that, the vitality that you have. What does that look like? Well, we know of this guy in Nashville, Tennessee. His name's Don Finto. He's 94 years old. The man does not live in a retirement village. He pastored for 25 years. A phenomenal reputation as a pastor and leader, and then retired from that on the basis of a scripture. But he didn't retire to a retirement village or home or with a boat or with a golf cart or golf course. He retired to a season in life where he surrounded himself intentionally with young adults. And he now lives in a house in the countryside with a house full of young adults in the YWAM type discipleship. And he's still traveling, still speaking, and still engaged with these young people in discipleship? What's the point? The energy, the vitality, the hope, the vision that he has, in contrast if I just surround myself with people that are dying. You choose. But build your life surrounded by multiple generations and focus on those that are younger while connecting with those that are older. The wisdom that I need and the zeal. I must surround myself with the zeal and the risk and the naivety of the young so that I continue to look outside and stay curious. So what else? So learning, don't play safe, or requires others to live to your standard of what safety is. If I run my life on that, it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Number 2 is surround yourself with multiple generations, all generations, always. Number 3, how do you decide who you spend time with? You've got limited time. So do I attend an event? It may have been like, do I go to the church that I was a part of 20 years ago? How do I have limited time? What do I do? And as I'm processing what's important, I realize who has stayed in connection with me. Where do I have ongoing connection? So prioritize connection over accomplishment. Prioritize relationship over attendance. And so what I chose to do is spend time with Bryden. It's a friend of mine. He's an orchardist, and it's right in the middle of harvest season. So I drove out to his orchard. We spent an hour and a half, 2 hours with him. It was great church. 2 people meeting together, telling stories of what God's doing, getting to see rocket apples straight off the tree, the most juicy, crisp apples I have tasted. Wonderful. That time compared to going to an event or a meeting where there's most people I don't even know now. So it was just a great little learning for me. Friends over attendance, connection over accomplishment is such a priority. And finally, what am I reading and what am I hearing God say in this time that we're calling a working sabbatical? And how does that even work? Well, I'm prioritizing time each day to try and have extended time either praying as I'm driving from Hawke's Bay to Taupo. It was like an hour it's actually 2 hours now that the speed limit's lower. It's more than 2 hours to get here. Stunningly beautiful. But just pray the whole time. If you don't know how to pray, you don't know what to say, worship or pray in the Spirit, because it's building something in the inner man. But as I'm doing that, I'm also reading, not as I'm driving, but I'm taking time every day to read. I'm focused on the book of Exodus. How do I read? I've learned from a friend of ours that walked us through spiritual directorship. She was training us and reading, slowing down as I'm reading the Bible so that it's reading me as I'm reading it. So I'm reading a passage, and then when a verse jumps out, I'll dialogue with that verse, as in, what if this is, I'm not just having a book, but it's interacting with me. So ask questions, write down questions, things that come to mind. Don't just read it. So what does that look like? I'm reading about Moses with the burning bush. Well, what was the bush like? Well, I can now use ChatGPT or Google. What was the bush? How high was it? Was it one bush? Why did God choose to speak from a bush? Was it the first time that God spoke? Was it the first time that got Moses' attention? What did it look like in the wilderness? How much food was there? How rough was there? What sort of survival skills? Would he have been on his own? What were the sheep like? Get curious. Fascinating. Moses is 80 years old. He takes the sheep into the backside of the wilderness, and he sees a bush that is burning, a thorny bush. Well, thorny? Where else in the Bible was there thorns? Just follow those little intriguing things. But it says, and because he was curious, he turned aside. Why is that not burning up? And that's when God spoke to him. What's the point? You can be 80 and still really curious. You can still be 80 and running around in the wilderness. There's so much in there. But as I'm unpacking the story of the book of Exodus, there's all these questions. When Israel came to Egypt, there were 70 of them. 430 years later, when Moses shows up as to lead them out of, there was somewhere between, I think, 2 to 3 million. What was the birth rate to achieve that? How did they grow so much? What kind of oppression? There was literally genocide, murder, slavery, abuse. It was horrific. Why did God wait so long to act? Well, that's a great question for you to unpack, because I want to unpack one thing. here's Moses. Moses grows up. Effectively, he is given up from his parent and he's raised by the princess of Egypt. So, single parent family. Work that one out. But he's raised in absolute opulence, absolute abundance, superpower of the day, access to anything that he could ever want and hope for. And he's there until the age 40. And then he tries to do something in his own ability because he has seen the cry of the people. He's seen the injustice and he tries to do something in his own ability. And we all know the story. He then gets caught out because he murders an Egyptian and tries to bury him in the sand. It's just not smart. But the point is, he did it in his own ability. He went by his own unction or drive rather than doing this out of his union, connection, and commission and timing of God. Now, you'd say, well, hang on, why did God wait so long? Great question. I don't know the answer fully, but I know that there's the scripture in the book of Peter that says God is not slow at keeping his promise, as some understand, but he's watchful, not wanting that any should perish. So it's not slow, it's patience. I'm not being slow, I'm just patient. I'm not sure if I can use that all the time for any excuse. What's the point? There is a purpose to this. There's a timing of this, and it was bigger than Moses. It was bigger than their nation, and it's bigger than his timeline. 400 years. So Moses goes from being raised in the palace, absolute opulence, single parent, almost like an orphan grown up in that environment, but access to so much. And then he goes into the wilderness for 40 years. So 40 years in the palace, 40 years in the wilderness. And he marries in the wilderness, and his father-in-law is Jethro, the priest of Midian. And Jethro's actually got two names. There's the name Jethro, and he has a name Reul. Well, it's fascinating. Here's the curiosity. What does the name mean? Jethro means overflow, abundance, and excellence. Isn't it strange that Moses would go from living in overflow, abundance, and excellence in the palace externally, comes into the wilderness where there's nothing, and he meets with overflow, excellence, and abundance. Jethro's second name, friend of God. Is it possible that he was in the midst of opulence, abundance, and excess, but he never learned true abundance, overflow, and excellence until he went to a place where externally there was none? For some of you, being shaped by the surroundings that's going on, don't overlook what you're learning in places where there feels like restriction and limitation is actually teaching you true abundance, overflow, and excellence. And you're being mentored as a friend of God. Crazy, crazy story there. And then he comes to this point of encountering this bush. God speaks to him. God commissions to him and says, I've seen, I've heard their cries, I've observed, it's come before me, and now it's time to act. What's the point for you, for me? For me, I'm being challenged to think bigger than me, bigger than my lifetime. Am I building with eternity in mind? How would that change the decisions that I'm making today? Well, I'll probably be less upset about the conversation. Or that conversational conflict that you're having right now, will it matter in 4 months' time, or 4 years' time, or 40 years' time, or 400 years' time? If it's not, it's probably not worth taking the time and attention and effort and stress that you're dealing with. Work it out. Secondly, God is not slow. In all of this journey of Moses, God knew, God spoke, God promised, God led, God guided, God knew where he was even when he messed it up. So for some of you feeling like you're on the backside of the desert, feeling like it's washed out, set aside, there's nothing left for you, God knows exactly where you are. And is it possible that you've actually been learning things in the wilderness that are setting you up to be perfectly prepared for the season that's coming? If you will trust him and that he cares for you and that he knows. So when God finally speaks to Moses and says, I'm sending you now and you're going to lead my people, you must lead my people, God's people, into their freedom. Moses is like, who am I to do this? It's actually irrelevant who you are. When God is with you, nothing's impossible. You have a commission to be sent. So I bless you. It's still work in progress. We've got coming up this week a workshop in Taupo, New Zealand. That's got 40, 45 people. It's going to be a fantastic day. I'm loving and looking forward to that. And we've got some more beauty. You're going to head to Rotorua, meet with some friends there. It's absolute stunning country, and getting excited about heading next week down to the Rootburn Track in Queenstown, and then a retreat in Queenstown, New Zealand. Absolute stunning. Have a wonderful, wonderful week, and make sure to post your questions, comments, thoughts, and feedback below. And we'll see you again with an update next time, or this time next week.